You're listening to Under the Shell Podcast, the best in America.
Welcome to Under the Shell, presented by Testudo Times. I'm Brendan Weissel.
Sam Jane.
And Michael Howes.
It's March, so we had to bring on someone who knows probably more about college basketball than most writers across the country. Alex Squadron, writer for Hoops HQ, and a guy that me and Brendan know a little bit from some travels to Africa this summer. Alex is here to talk about Maryland's postseason chances, what he kind of thinks about the Terps, that type of thing. So, Alex, thanks for hopping on.
I appreciate you guys having me. It's good to see you again.
Well, let's get right into it. Kind of give us your impression of Maryland here as they head into March. We obviously know they're a 2 seed in the Big Ten, kind of sitting right around that 4-5 line. As they go into the Big Ten tournament, what is kind of your expectations for where they could land and what you're looking for this team over the next couple weeks?
My expectations for this team, I mean, I don't know if you guys saw, I put out kind of a preview of the conference tournaments, and I actually picked Maryland to win the Big Ten tournament. I really like this team. I mean, I just think the build of it, I actually went to College Park. I saw both of you guys there and sat down with Coach Kevin Willard, and he just kind of walked me through how they built this team and kind of the turnaround that the program's had overall. And look, the pieces just fit. I mean, having two big guys like Queen and Reese inside and then surrounding them with, elite shooters, that formula has just worked. Now, obviously, there are questions about the depth. I saw, Sam, you wrote something about that. And it certainly is a concern going forward. I think the fact that this team got the double bye so they don't have to play, four games or 5 games is obviously going to help. And I think you can start to raise questions if they play a really physical, closely contested game or something goes to overtime. But I think at least, coming off a rest, this team has what it takes to kind of go all the way in the Big Ten. And then, once you get to the NCAA tournament, so much of that is matchup based. So, what do you guys think of just that depth issue? Is that something that is going to be a big problem going forward?
I think that in a way, the depth is a little overblown. I think if you look, a very similar team and a team that I've kind of looked at is the 2014 Wisconsin team, actually, that went to the Final Four. And if you look at their roster, they didn't really have a ton of bench options. It was pretty much the starters which they rode pretty heavily, and then basically a couple of bench guys after it. But I think that especially in tournament time, once kind of you get into these games that are extended, they're so long, right? You have weeks off in between. I think that the depth has actually kind of shrunk. Coaches already shrink their rotations in March. So I think that if you just have a couple reliable options, that's what matters. My concern is less about the fatigue when it comes to the depth and more the NCAA tournament is reffed way differently than the Big Ten, right? We all know that the Big Ten is probably the most physical league in the conference or in the country. And I think that if Queen or Reese were to pick up 2 quick fouls early on in a game, extended Jordan Geronimo or Tafari Kapari minutes don't exactly scream optimism for Kevin Willard and his team. But I do think that when it comes down to it, I don't think the reason Maryland's going to lose a game in March is because they just don't have any depth. That's not what I would say would be kind of my number one concern with them, actually.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think the foul trouble is the thing that would concern me the most. Julian Reese has been slightly better this year, but I feel like just going back the past 3 years, any game where he gets in foul trouble early, Maryland's been able to survive it. They survived it in the Michigan game. But those games just have to scare you. And obviously it's win or go home. And so if he gets into foul trouble early and Derik Queen's not having a good game, it's just really hard for them to win. So I think if the team sits out of foul trouble, then those guys are clearly healthy enough to play the minutes they've been playing. Rodney Rice has been playing, upwards of 35 minutes a game for pretty much the back half of the season. So they definitely have the guys to do it, but that would definitely be the biggest concern is fouls. Alex, you sat down with Derik Queen, I believe, when you came to Maryland. What were your overall reactions to him? He obviously just got named Big Ten Freshman of the Year today.
I mean, just as a player, I could not be more impressed with him. It definitely has surpassed kind of my expectations. The guy is just so skilled. I mean, what he's able to do around the basket, his footwork, his moves. I've gotten the chance to talk to some NBA scouts about him as well. And obviously there are some question marks about just, he's an interesting prospect. He's a little bit different, can't really shoot from the outside. Maybe some concerns on defense. He's not really a rim protector, but the talent is just so undeniable that I think he's climbed draft boards just because he is that good and that polished for someone his age. It's pretty astonishing. So, yeah, he's been the key. I mean, he's really been the key. Obviously, it's like a completely new team and the build is different, but this team goes as Queen goes. And he's been insane. So I've been very impressed.
Do you kind of have any good stories? I know you've traveled across the country, but in terms of personalities, I know you talk mostly to Derik and Kevin Willard. Where do those two kind of rank in your people that you've talked to? Is there any interesting anecdotes or stories you were able to pull out of them? And where do they kind of stack up compared to some of your other interviews you've done this year?
They were great. Everyone was great there. I really enjoyed my visit. Queen's a little bit quieter. I'm sure you guys have covered him too. Willard was great. I mean, I sat with him for like 30 minutes and he gave me a bunch. I think his honesty about just the issues from last year and what kind of sparked the turnaround was refreshing to kind of hear him just kind of own up to the mistakes that he made in terms of just what it takes to succeed in the modern era of college basketball. The program just didn't raise enough NIL, didn't hit the transfer portal hard enough, didn't recruit necessarily the right guys. They were bringing in freshmen, not transfers. And as we've seen this season, a big key is just bringing in, experienced players that fit the system, fit the players that you already have. And credit to Willard, he did that. I mean, he knew he had Reese coming back. He knew he had Queen, who just is as talented as a freshman as you can get. So that's two big guys. And to give those guys space, you need shooting. And they did not have shooting in the past. And so he did that, bringing in Gillespie, Miguel, Rice. I mean, these are guys who very clearly were there to fit a role, and they've all played their roles perfectly. And that's really what I love about this team. Again, those pieces just fit. It just makes sense. You got two guys shooting over 40% from three. I think Rice has got to be 36. I think as a team, they're like 37. So they're, in the top 50 in the country. And I think a big key has been they've been really good defensively. This is a top 10 defense on KenPom. And when you're doing that, and then you have, the potential to kind of explode offensively with a talent like Queen and then shooters, you kind of have all the ingredients. So like I said, I really like this team and like what Willard did to put it together.
In terms of, you said that they're your pick to win the Big Ten championship. I want to ask kind of, as when we get to Selection Sunday next week, what would you say is kind of the ceiling, the median, and the floor for where Maryland could end up?
I'm not a bracketologist. I don't know much about just kind of, how the committee makes these decisions. My understanding is that the conference tournaments, have obviously some play in it. So we'll see what happens. Right now, I think our bracketologist has them on Hoops HQ as a 4 seed. That to me seems like where they're at. I think it could change, obviously, if they manage to win the Big Ten, and especially if they end up playing Michigan State. But I'm not sure kind of where their exact ceiling is and how far they could fall. I mean, I don't imagine with the resume they put together, especially, I feel like over the past month, they've only lost once. They lost on a miracle half-court shot. With how well this team has been playing into the tournament, I can't imagine that they could fall, really drastically. They're going to play a good team in the quarterfinals of the Big Ten. So, I think they're in a pretty good position, as good a position as you could hope for.
I mean, we know this Maryland team is going to be competitive as far as they go. You mentioned it, the buzzer beater. Their last 3 losses have all been on the last possession, and they haven't played a non-competitive game all year in my eyes. With that being said, aside from seeding in the tournament, what are your thoughts on how far Maryland could go in the tournament?
I'm not just saying this because I'm all with you guys. I really like this team. I do. Now, again, I think it all changes if, look, they can't afford any injuries because obviously the depth is an issue. If they're playing these really physical, tough games, obviously there is sometimes that quick turnaround. You can't really afford slow starts. In March Madness, you got to kind of be ready to go. So, but again, I think I've said before, I think this team's has Final Four potential. They have the talent to do it. They have all the pieces to do it. When you're looking, at teams that could potentially make a run, I'm looking at obviously the resume, but also are they good on both sides of the ball? This team has been great. They're a top 35 offense, a top 10 defense on KenPom. Obviously, they put up a ton of points. Do you have just like the talent to do it? They have it, and they have the coaching. I just think that they have all the ingredients. Matchups, obviously, it that dictates a lot of it. But just like I feel comfortable saying that they can go on a run to San Antonio, and definitely rip off a couple wins in the NCAA tournament.
On the flip side, what type of team would you kind of envision giving Maryland some trouble? And are there any examples that you have as kind of an archetype or a unit that could really kind of present some issues for them?
It's tough. I think I just agree with Brendan. Like they've played everybody tough, and I think the issue is like what Brendan said. If there's a team that they run up against that has a kind of go-to big or bigs inside that can get their bigs in foul trouble, you can't really afford for Queen to pick up three or Reese to pick up three. Those, that hurts you a lot. So if they're going against a team that is kind of aggressive, dominant inside, and can force those guys to pick up a few early fouls, that would be the biggest issue I'm looking at. But again, I just think the fact that they've been able to play with, against any kind of opponent they face in the Big Ten, a lot of different kind of styles and different teams in the Big Ten, and they put up a fight against everybody. Those losses that they've had, going back to the Ohio State game, that game, that's a banked in three, right? And then Holloman shot. I mean, you guys were there, right? I don't even know what to say about that.
Northwestern at the buzzer.
I know that was they really didn't have Northwestern right in overtime at the buzzer. I mean, the Holloman shot, I know that they were kind of a disaster offensively that game. But yeah, I just think the fact that they have been able to play to different styles, play against different opponents. The issue I would see coming up is like, is there a super aggressive team that can get some of these guys in foul trouble early and force them to go to the bench?
Who would you say, as somebody that covers the Big Ten pretty extensively, you obviously have talked about how well you like Maryland, but the Big Ten has struggled recently, of course. Do you think that this year has a chance to kind of reverse that trend? I mean, no national champion since Michigan State in a long time. I know Purdue made it last year, but in terms of kind of the overall success of the conference, it's been down. How do you see the conference this year, and do you expect a kind of a rebound in that regard?
Yeah, I feel like we've almost already seen it. I mean, there's just so many teams in the conference that I could see competing and going on runs. Whether it's Michigan State, whether it's Maryland. I think, Sam, you and I were texting, and I was vouching for Wisconsin as a big threat as well. I like Wisconsin. There's just a lot of teams that are dangerous, that look capable of going on runs, that are loaded with talent. What Michigan State has done is obviously incredible, and nobody really saw that coming. So I think the fact that some of these teams, Maryland included, have just surpassed expectations this year. The Big Ten definitely already is looking like like they've kind of reversed this trend. And then, I think that there's a handful of teams that can, go on a run. And obviously if that happens, that really changes the narrative. So, I like a lot of these teams, but definitely the Big Ten has been, I think, better than advertised this year.
It definitely helps, that Big Ten now has UCLA and Oregon, two teams who have kind of been known to make runs in the NCAA tournament. I want to talk a little bit more about your work, Alex. You've had a chance now to dive in super deep, just specifically on college basketball. What has been your favorite article or team you've got a chance to really dive in on this year?
Good question. We were talking before we started recording about the article I did on John Fanta. That was a lot of fun. Obviously, he's the college basketball guy. I met up with him in New York. We had lunch together. I followed him kind of for a game. He's just awesome. I mean, his energy and passion for college basketball is really contagious. And as somebody who's obviously working in the field, just what a joy to be around that, and then to work on that story. And I do love to tell the stories that typically aren't told. And I don't think Fanta's gotten his shine yet. So that was really fun. The only other one I'll mention is actually one of my first articles for Hoops HQ was I got assigned to follow Rick Pitino for a day during the preseason. So this is when nobody knew how good St. John's was. I remember just like talking to Pitino and him being like, yeah, I think we're pretty good this year. And, at the time, I think they're projected to finish like 5th in the Big East. And just being with him for a full day. That day actually started with me meeting him at Equinox at 5:30 in the morning to work out. Because the guy is a machine. I mean, the like premise of the article was he's 72 years old. I'm 29 and I could like barely keep up with him. It was ridiculous. He worked out at 5:30 in the morning. We went from the workout to a like 2-mile hike. Basically, we hiked through like the woods by his house with his dog. I remember like checking my steps at like 8 a.m. and I had walked more than I had walked the previous day by 8 a.m. So that was amazing. And basically to be around Pitino for a full day and like pick his brain, and then watch practice, watch, player development sessions, you can see why this guy is such a legend and is so successful. He's so locked in, so meticulous, so dedicated. He's got a very singular focus on winning. And you see kind of the results of that. So to look back on that now, seeing where St. John's is, pretty cool to say that I was like there at, in preseason with Pitino, before all this happened.
Yeah, you were. I mean, some are saying that Alex Squadron is the reason that there's a documentary.
Hey, man, you said it. I don't know. I mean, it seems like maybe I sparked the success a little bit. I don't
know. I hate to bring it back to Maryland, but you've seen a lot of really good teams this year, obviously traveling around. I want to ask, is there a combination of big men, Reese and Queen, obviously, that stack up to them across the country? I mean, obviously you got teams like Duke with Kaman and Malik Brown, and then Cooper, obviously. There's some really good ones out there. Texas A&M has a really nice group of big, but I was just wondering if you have seen a more talented and a kind of a good diversity of skill sets, I guess, between Reese's versatility or Queen's versatility and Reese's veteranship. How do they stack up compared to other front courts?
Right up there near the top. I mean, the one that comes to mind is Wolf and Golden in Michigan. But again, I think it's such a unique pairing because in a way with Maryland, you wouldn't necessarily think it would work.
Right. That's what's fascinating is like.
Agreed. I mean, I think I pressed Willard on this a little bit. Like, why are they able to play so well together? Look, neither of them are 3-point shooters. They're kind of bruising. I mean, there's some finesse to Queen's game, but they like to take it inside. They like to be in the paint.
I mean, he said in the preseason he was planning on playing them together like for 15 minutes a game.
Staggering, right?
And now they play basically 28 minutes a game.
I think, and what he said to me was that it's really a credit to them kind of figuring out how to fit together and where guys like the ball. I mean, and it does start with Reese and how kind of smart he is as a player. And obviously him being a veteran, having that leadership, I feel like the whole team kind of follows his lead at this point. But the way that they're able to kind of fit together and feed each other in the right spots, again, you're right. You wouldn't think that it would work. I mean, at least Wolf with Golden Wolf can shoot. And is a little bit more of I don't know. Queen is also versatile, but it's a different kind of versatility with Wolf. I just think that the fact that it's working, they're as like kind of unique a combo as you'll find. And the fact that they're able to work well together is a credit to just like them figuring it out and also just how good they are. I mean, you just can't really slow down, those two guys. They're just both so talented. So,
yeah. Well, Alex just broke down everything Maryland related. We do that too, so you guys get all your Maryland basketball content. Alex does great work over at Hoops HQ as they head over into March. You want to plug your stuff, squad?
Nah, I want to plug your guys' stuff. You guys all need to listen to this. I know you're listening to it now, but you guys have been crushing it. I've been following your stuff, obviously, especially when I was going down to College Park. I listened to some pods and I was like, man, these guys are awesome. So I mean, check out Hoops HQ if you guys subscribe to Hoops HQ for sure. We're definitely kind of ramping things up for March Madness. We've got a bracketologist who's got everything covered. I'll be traveling a bunch for the tournament, so definitely tap in with us. But shout out to you guys because you guys are crushing it and keep up the good work.
Thank you, Alex. You can get a Hoops HQ membership for $20. I promise you that will be well worth your time. You probably will win it back with your bracket, honestly.
100%. Yeah, $20, man. That's like one beer at Madison Square Garden. $20. That's easy.
And for our local audience, that's like one drink in DC. So perfect.
There you go.
For out on, Alex, we appreciate your time and good luck with March Madness.
Thank you. Same to you guys.
Well, guys, postseason basketball is officially here. We talked about the women's last week at the Big Ten tournament. They didn't fare as well, but the men's team is entering the Big Ten tournament on a hot streak, beating Michigan and Northwestern to end the season. Guys, they drew the number 2 seed in the conference, winning 14 conference games, tied for the most in program history in the Big Ten. A really impressive feat for Kevin Willard's squad, who obviously is one of the hottest teams in the country, winning 6 of their past 7 games. First off, before we kind of dive into the Big Ten tournament, let's talk about, I think we mainly want to focus on the Michigan game. Big win for the Terps to go into Ann Arbor and pull out a W. Michigan's definitely reeling. That plays a factor for sure. But, over these past 2 games, particularly on the road against the Wolverines, what was your guys' biggest takeaway? And who do you think, impressed you the most from this stretch?
If we're talking about this recent stretch, I would say Rodney Rice. I mean, we talked about it last week, but he really lit it up for the Terps in the second half. I think a word that would stick out to me about that second half against the Wolverines is resilience. We've seen it many times so far this season where the Terps get a lead in the first half and then they start to take a back seat a little bit in the second half. They get a little more lax. And then they lose or it becomes close. And there were moments where it got close against the Wolverines in Ann Arbor, but the Terps hung on to that lead and never gave it away. And a big part of that was, one, Selton Miguel, really good first half. That defense from the Terps was really good in the first half, but also Rodney Rice in the second half. He's been the go-to guy to make those 3-pointers, get that kill shot from Maryland, really grab momentum and really, halt the opponent in any sort of momentum that they are building.
I'll pick up where you left off, at least talking about Rodney Rice. I think the most underrated thing that he's been doing on this team so successfully is how many minutes he's been playing. He's played almost the entire game for the back half of the season, which is, a part of the reason why Maryland is able to have such a short rotation and stick with the Crab 5, if you will. My MVP from the past 2 games, or I guess past couple of weeks, is Jordan Geronimo. I said it last week, actually, when we were recapping the Michigan episode, but his ability to give this team energy off the bench is something they so desperately needed. And having that is just so important going forward and going into March. Him giving you 14 quality minutes where he's playing really hard on defense, maybe dunking on somebody, and then just like giving the team another leader to look to on the floor. Yeah, he's not going to make a flashy play on offense. He's not likely not going to do that. But just to have another guy out there who you can count on, he's really taken that role as being the sixth man. I will say Jay Young also played particularly well, against Northwestern. So having the bench look slightly better is a big improvement. It goes along.
I'm going to be slightly negative on this podcast because I think everything is kind of positive surrounding Maryland right now. And I'm going to talk about, later on some concerns I have entering the tournament. But right now, I do want to point out that Maryland's offense has kind of been a little bit of a slump, guys. Over the past 4 games, they're averaging 67 points. They haven't topped 80 over that stretch. They've struggled at points in big runs. We saw in the Northwestern game, they really couldn't, get anything going in the first half. Doesn't feel like the offense is entirely flowing as well as it once did, and the numbers back that up. Ken Pom once had them within the top 20 in their offensive efficiency ranking. Right now, they're back at number 34 in the nation. So they've dropped a pretty significant margin in terms of the offensive rating and numbers there. And I think that in part is due to them playing better defenses. Michigan has a really good defense. Michigan State's defense is one of the best in the country. Penn State and Northwestern are both mediocre teams, but Penn State always seems to give Maryland trouble, and Northwestern has some solid defenders. Nicholson is a good player. So I do think that it's partly opponent based, but I worry and I wonder a little bit if this offense is maybe hitting a little bit of a slump. I wouldn't look too much into it, but I do think it's worth pointing out that as they enter postseason play, this is probably their worst the offense has looked in, I would say, 2 months. So definitely something to keep an eye on as we head into the Big Ten tournament.
No, it's absolutely interesting. It's a very good point. If you look at the 4 games before that, the Rutgers, Nebraska, Iowa, USC game had over 80 in all those games, and the lowest was 83, and obviously the 100-plus point performance against Iowa. I will say this Maryland team, and we've noted all year, is not a team that's meant to win in games where they score that many points. I mean, this Maryland team is built to be a very defensive team. That's how Kevin Willard likes to coach, and it's built to win a low-scoring game. I mean, I don't know if it's built to win a 58-55 game like the Michigan State game, but this team is built to, win some of those slower games, which they're able to pull out the wins, which I think is the more important point. But I do agree with you, Sam. Looking back a month ago, the offense was probably at its peak, but that's not to say that they can't win games with the style they're playing right now.
Definitely. And let's talk about some of those next games. Mike, you want to lay out the Big Ten tournament path here for the Terps?
Yes, and this is going to be our game of the week this week. Not just a single game. We're picking the entire tournament outlook for the Terps this week. So on Friday, Maryland's going to be playing either Illinois or Ohio State or Iowa. So I guess kind of looking forward to Friday's game. No matter who the Terps are playing, I feel pretty confident that they're going to win their first game. I think a pretty fun way to do this actually is over-under games they're going to win in the tournament. I'm going to put it at 1.5 right now for Maryland.
Some of it totally depends on matchups. I think if Maryland plays Ohio State in that Friday game, the quarterfinals, they'll win. Illinois is going to be a tougher game. But to be honest, as many people know, Maryland has been very successful against Illinois during their time in the Big Ten. So I do like Maryland in that Friday game, regardless of who they play. I would say on Saturday, they're probably likely to face Purdue. Michigan has really been on a slide, and unless they figured out the tournament, to be fair, Michigan has probably had the hardest schedule in the country, with the exception of maybe Auburn in the past 2 or 3 weeks. So that's why they've been losing games, because they've been playing very good teams. They played Michigan State twice. They obviously played they played Maryland, rather. That semifinal game, if it's Michigan, I expect Maryland to win. I think it's going to be Purdue, and that's a game I think Maryland will lose. So to give my prediction a little bit early, I'll go under that 1.5, but I do think Maryland makes it to the semifinals. That Purdue game would be really good, and I know Maryland definitely would love a rematch because of that. Again, they lost way, way back in December.
Okay, so let's break down Illinois. I'm gonna give kind of these guys talked about the overall look. I'm gonna kind of give you more of an insight into Illinois and then either Purdue or Michigan, because we don't know who's gonna make the finals. I'm just gonna guess Illinois is gonna win, but I mean I could see Ohio State pulling out an upset. We obviously know that Maryland smoked Illinois back in Champaign on January 24th. They defeated them 91-70, and probably their biggest win of the season in terms of margin of victory against a solid opponent. But some key things in that game. Julian Reese and Derik Queen, we know they killed Illinois. 27 points and 25, respectively. Reese had 17 rebounds. I mean, they just dominated the Illini's front court. The problem is that Illinois was without 7'1" center Tomislav Ivičić, who's their second leading scorer and their top rebounder. They had to start a true freshman behind him. I do think that that's very important to note. And when you kind of look at, this team, Illinois is a really weird group, right? They've kind of gone through a bunch of injuries. They've had a really up and down schedule, but I do think this is one of the more talented teams in the Big Ten. Kasparis Jakonis, I'm terrible at pronouncing his last name, is going to make the All Big Ten freshman first team. He's playing really well. They enter the weekend off 3 straight wins, all by 8 points or more, and 2 of them are ranked wins. They beat Purdue and they beat Michigan, and then dominated Iowa as well. So this is a team that I think the variance is really, really high because of one reason, guys. They shoot a ton of threes per game. I mean, you look at what this team does on the offensive side of the ball. They're going to hoist a bunch of threes. They're going to hope they go in, and then they're going to try to rebound the crap out of the basketball. This is a group that is the best offensive rebounding team in the Big Ten and one of the best in the country. So I think that Maryland has to be focused on holding them on the offensive glass, which they obviously have 2 of the better big men in the Big Ten at that. And then really you just kind of have to hope that they're not on from three. And I know that's not great and probably not what Maryland fans want to hear, but Illinois is such a variable and high variance team that you just don't, I think, really know what this group is going to bring. I mean, they attempt, over 9 a game. So it's like, if they're not really, if they're not making them, then you're looking good. They only shoot 31%, but then they could have a game like how they did against Michigan where they, drop over 80 points and really just dominate. So that's that. And then Purdue, Maryland lost in their one game of the year. It's been a long time. Keep it brief. It's Braden Smith. He's their best player. He's probably the best player in the Big Ten right now. The point guard is pretty incredible. So you slow him and Trey Kaufman-Renn down in their two-man game, I think they'd have a good chance. I actually think Maryland would have a better chance against Purdue than they would Illinois. So I'm going to go with my little preview and say over on the 1.5. I think they beat Illinois. And then I also think Purdue beats Michigan, but I think it might be a little closer than people think. So I would take Maryland against Michigan or Purdue over them playing Illinois. Like, I think their most likely loss would happen against the Fighting Illini in the quarterfinals. That's kind of my take.
So you've got over, Brendan's got under. I'm also going to take the under. Not to jump the gun a little bit here, but also let's extend it entire postseason. Big Ten plus NCAA tournament. Let's say 3.5 wins. I guess for you, Sam, I'll put it at 4.5 because you think they're hitting the over in the Big Ten tournament. But Brendan, 4.5, 3.5.
Well, 4.5 would be them making the Elite Eight.
Yeah.
Well, I guess it depends. I mean, they could also win 3
Yeah.
at the Big Ten tournament, and then it depends. What's the line? What's your final decision on the line there, Mike? 3.5?
Let's say 3.5 total postseason.
I would say over because I think it's wow. That's actually really tough. I'll stick with my guns, but some of it totally depends on matchups and who they play in the NCAA tournament. Depending on
from Brendan there, matchups.
Well, yeah, obviously, but I think it really does depend on who they play in the round of 64 and 32. But with that being said, this Maryland team is going to be favored and expected to win those games, and so with that mindset, I think that this team will be able to win 2 games in March Madness, but the seeding is definitely going to matter. Because if they're a 5 seed versus a 3 seed, it's going to be a big difference.
Yeah. I think I'm going to take the under on that one. I think they get 1 game in the Big Ten tournament and then 2 in March Madness. But I don't see them going past the Sweet 16.
I would go over. I think that my math is kind of adding up to me taking the over. So let's switch over to a more dispiriting loss and talk about the worst loss that Maryland women's basketball has ever suffered in Big Ten tournament history. Absolutely blown out against Michigan on Thursday. Guys, it wasn't even close.
On Friday, but yeah.
Friday, yeah, sorry. It's always like I get scrambled with the tournament.
Because there's so many games. It's ridiculous.
I know. 98-71. It's the most points they've ever allowed in a conference tournament game in the Big Ten, obviously, and the most they've allowed all season. The Wolverines shot 61% from the field and 52% from 3. This was just a game that Maryland fell behind early, kind of crawled back, and then they got blown out again. It was like the story twice over, basically, without the second part in the second half.
Exactly.
So it was a really tough loss, and I think it kind of evaporates any chances that the women had of hosting a game now. So, Brendan, how does Maryland recover from this? Is this something that worries you long-term, or is it just kind of a blip in the road for maybe, what could be a successful March?
Here's what I'll say. The recipe to beating Maryland women's basketball in the Big Ten tournament the past 2 years at least has been to shoot the absolute lights out of the ball. Nebraska did it last year. With that being said, Maryland was never going to win that game. If you score 6 points in the first quarter, unless the other team scores 7, you're not going to win. Michigan obviously scored 27 in that first quarter. And then, oddly enough, I think Maryland played one of their best quarters of the year in the second quarter. But as Sam said, it's so hard to go down by 20 plus points in the first quarter and crawl back unless you're playing in the NBA, which they obviously are not. That game, the biggest thing that worried about me is the people who are supposed to show up didn't show up. Cheyenne Sellers, Ali Kubek, Kayleen Smichael combined for 14 points. Shy had 2 of those. The 3 of them together this entire season have been averaging 41.8 a game. I mean, if some of your top scorers, if Cheyenne Sellers and Cam Smiker, who are the top scorers, aren't averaging even close to what they've been averaging, there's no mathematical scenario in the world that if those three players average 14 or combined for 14 points, that you're going to win a game. And so that was just definitely the most concerning part. I will say, if you're going to lose in the Big Ten tournament, you might as well get smacked in the mouth, because now you know what you have to do in March, and you know that can't happen again. So if there's any positive to spin from that, it's that it's not necessarily a good sight. I mean, it's a possible good thing going into March Madness. Other takeaway from that game, Avery McKinney played a lot of minutes and actually played pretty well. I feel like every year this time we see somebody on Maryland, we're like, wow, if they play at their best, then maybe next year they'll be a huge contributor, which we saw with Ali Kubek last year. Not necessarily the case this year. All in all, to answer your question, Sam, I would say overall it's concerning going into March Madness, because very, very likely not going to host now. And it's just such a letdown of a game. Sayla Poffenbarger came back. It was her first game back after injury, but only played 10 minutes, didn't really look herself. Overall, it's just not how you want to start postseason play. And so it definitely didn't raise my confidence levels for March Madness.
Yeah, Christina Dulce basically said what you said, Brendan. I mean, talked about how there was a kind of sense in the locker room of like before the game of, I guess we could lose this game or whatnot. And now she's like, one more and you're going home. So I do think that there might be, something to say about kind of just getting smacked and having to.
Kind of echoing what you guys said. Definitely concerning. You want to see better performance from your top stars. You want to see better performance from Sellers, from Schmeichel. And it sucks not to be able to host. I do want to point out the double bye can be a blessing, but it also can be a curse sometimes. Advantage usually goes to the team that played yesterday. You got that extra rest, but the team that you're playing has already played in 2 games. They've been in these high leverage moments. They kind of know what to expect in the Big Ten tournament. So that can be a little bit of a curse. I also want to point out this is not a deep team this year. We've talked about it so far this season, but this is not a deep team. And maybe a deep run in the Big Ten tournament. You said they weren't going to win this anyways. So a deep run where they end up losing, not winning the tournament, that could have exhausted the group. Maybe it is a good thing that they lost that early. Maybe they're going to have fresh legs going into the NCAA tournament.
No, it's a good point. There was definitely a moment in that game where Brenda Fries called off the Dogs. Sarah Tabiasu very interestingly played the entire game. Not sure I quite understand that one. But Cheyenne Sellers played 19 minutes. Kayleen Schmeichel played 23, and Ali Kubek played 12. There was a certain point in that game where Brendan knew that the game was over, and at that point, it's like, yeah, we got to rest. We got to be healthy for what is ultimately a much more important tournament. So I agree with what you said there, Mike.
And that's a big thing for this year's group. I mean, how many injuries have they had so far? You just mentioned Poffenbarger came back for that game. Sellers has been dealing with injuries all season. No Bree McDaniel. Maybe it's a good thing that they're getting this rest. And it's a wake-up call, getting smacked in the mouth.
I would put my concern level at like a 6. I think that the not hosting thing is the most crushing thing that came out of that. But I want to kind of flip it around and say, do we really think Cheyenne Sellers and Kayleen Schmeichel are going to combine to score, 12 points again?
It was and Ali Kubek played combined. If you take them out,
if it's just Shy and Kayleen, it was
12. Yeah, Kubek and Shy both had 2.
How much are we thinking that that's going to happen again? Probably won't. I would imagine. So
it will not.
If that, like Brendan said, if that happens, you're done. So it's like what you do, it's over. So I think that that's probably not going to happen again. And I would say that this game was a little bit of an anomaly.
Yeah, and unlike the tournament last year, Maryland's not going to play a team like Iowa State in the first round. They're going to get their legs under them in a different location and then have a day off to play a stronger team. So it's very likely this team makes a second weekend.
It's possible for sure. Let's move on to 2 teams who had some, easier wins per se. Men's lacrosse, obviously, the number 1 team in the country, and they continue to thrive. Brendan, an interesting game against Delaware. Not really. 14-3. Just kind of wanted to set it up as if it would be. We don't have to spend too much time, but talk about the Terps here against the Blue Hens.
Delaware definitely doesn't have the best offense in the country, but I would push back on that a little bit, actually. Logan McNaney had the game of his life. He had 16 saves on 19 shots, and he hasn't been playing at that percentage all season. But as I've been saying for weeks, he is the reason the team is playing so dang well. If he keeps up that performance, or even close to that performance, this team won't lose a game this season. He knows this is last year, and clearly he is absolutely ready for this moment. He's won a championship before, but I didn't get a chance to watch the game. But looking back at the stats and some replays, I was like, wow. That is extremely, extremely impressive. And I thought that he'd be good this year, but I didn't think he would put up those type of numbers. Maryland will now play UVA on Saturday. Virginia has had a very interesting season. They lost to Richmond, who Maryland beat earlier. They got blown out by Ohio State, and they lost to Hopkins. Those are their 3 losses. So they're at the back end of the rankings. I think they're somewhere like 18 right now. Don't quote me on that. But this is a team that I would expect Maryland to be able to take care of. And just same thing. I'll keep it short. If the defense and McNaney keep playing well, then this is a game they can easily win. But obviously a rivalry game going to Virginia, you really never know what's going to happen.
Let's talk about another really good defensive performance. Just flip it over to the women's side. A really, really good game against number 12, James Madison. They continued to just stifle on that side of the ball. 11-5 win over the Dukes, their first ranked win of the season. Guys, Maryland forced 18 turnovers. Pretty phenomenal game. JJ Soriano played incredible in goal. And we continue to see that this defense is really thriving for sure. Soriano is now besting a 72% save rate, and it's almost, again, looking like the Kathy Reese is going to figure it out. Let's talk about this game and kind of preview the upcoming slate that they have. Some Michigan State and Penn State upcoming, Big Ten season rolling around. Let's talk about how the Terps are looking here.
I do believe that Georgetown was ranked when they played them, but regardless, they got that win back a couple weeks ago. It's kind of the same story with goalkeeping. Other than the Syracuse game, JJ Soriano has looked like one of the best goalies in the Big Ten. I'm assuming if you take those stats out of her save percentage on the season, it's even higher than what you said. So JMU had a home winning streak of 19. Maryland went in and snapped that. That shouldn't go unnoticed. Maryland played very well. As I said, James Madison is a very interesting and up and down team this year. Maryland will play at Penn State on Thursday. It's a game I would expect them to win. The Michigan game at home, that's going to be a very tough game. That is a game that I could see going Michigan's way. They've been a very defensive team for the past 3 years, play a very similar style to Maryland and have got the best of them. That game is going to be tough. If I had to give a prediction, I would say if Maryland plays like they have since the Syracuse game, they'll win that game. So I'm expecting Maryland to get a 2-0 start to Big Ten play. But we'll have to see. And women's lacrosse is obviously weird because they don't once they enter Big Ten play, they play some non-conference games. So they'll have a lot more to dissect for the rest of the season. But I'm expecting them to get off to a good start in Big Ten play.
Isn't that weird? Because the baseball team did the exact same thing, playing UCLA at home at the Bob.
UCLA is a Big Ten game.
That's what I'm saying.
People forget that.
Yeah, I know. Conference, and they're going to bounce around. But kind of funny how that works. Mike, you were at the Bob all weekend. Take us through what happened there with Matt Swope's team, who continues to play around the 500 mark.
Yeah, it was another 2-2 week for Maryland. They had a midweek win, but then they went 1-2 against UCLA. Did pick up a win on Saturday against the Bruins, where Logan Hastings, freshman pitcher, looked really good in his start. Some optimism for the pitching staff there. Not much optimism on Friday and Sunday for the pitching staff. It was kind of a tale of two different concerns on both games. On Friday, the Terps are leading 5-0 in the sixth inning. Kyle McCoy exits his start, allowed only one run. That was in his final frame. And then after that, the Bruins just began scoring. It really started to pick up in the ninth inning. The Terps were ahead 5-3. Andrew Johnson, reliever, who had been pretty reliable up to that point, gives up a 3-run home run. UCLA quickly takes the lead in the ninth. Chris Hakopian ties it in the bottom of the ninth. Another clutch moment from the younger Hakopian Friday night. But then UCLA goes on to score 6 runs in the 10th inning. And there was just no coming back from Maryland there. It was Ryan Van Buren on the mound for that 10th inning for Maryland. And then on Sunday when they lost to the Bruins, they gave up 11 runs in the second inning. Joey McManus gave up 8 runs in his start, left the second inning without even getting an out in the frame. Braden Ryan comes in. He gets 3 more runs scored on him before he exits. Really not a good look from Maryland early on Sunday in that game. They've got to expect better starts from McManus, who entering the season was one of those proven, reliable arms Maryland was hoping to depend on. He's had a couple outings like that so far this season where it's not been his greatest start. I still think it's pretty early to be judging the pitching staff. I know it hasn't been the most optimistic performances from them so far, but there's a lot of injuries going on in the staff right now. They just got back Logan Coaster on Sunday. It was his first appearance of the year. They're still waiting to get back Evan Smith, who started first weekend, hasn't started since due to injury. Still haven't had James Gladden pitch. There's a lot of moving pieces. Any single injury really tinkers with that rotation, with the pitching staff and the depth that they have. So I'm not pushing the panic button yet. Still got to see a couple more weeks.
That's the theme of the
Mike's
season.
going to keep saying that until it's May, and then I don't know what he's going to say then. I don't know if I necessarily agree with you about, not too early to tell about the pitching staff. I do want to ask, because you were at the Bob, obviously, on Friday after that, loss in extra innings where Maryland let up 6 runs in the 10th. What was the vibe of the team after the game?
Disappointment. Offense obviously has been producing for this team all season so far. They've really been taking the lead on leading this team and making sure they are in positions to win. And it seems like in a bunch of these losses, it's the pitching staff that just completely ruins the position that they were just in and completely blunders the game that they could have won. I know you asked about Friday. I want to go to what Swope said post-game on Sunday, something that he's kind of repeated throughout this season so far early on, is that they're just an average team right now. They had a 2-2 week last week. He says they're just an average team. They've got a lot of talent, but just an average team right now because of these pitching struggles and also defensive struggles along the way. Like, the defense has not played well either. It's really just been the offense that's consistently producing. And until they're able to hit all 3 phases continuously in a game, they're going to stay an average team, an above average team, despite an offense averaging 11 runs a game.
I have a debate question for us, and then we got to get this going.
New debate.
Do we think that sophomore slumps? And I brought it up because Joey McManus is an example. Deshaun Harris-Smith on that end. Roman Hemby in football. You look at examples countless times of guys who really excel in their freshman year, maybe kind of start the season off really well, and then not as great their sophomore season. I mean, I'm sure there are plenty other examples I could pull up, but I'm curious what you guys think, if the sophomore slump is a real thing, and why do you think it kind of is what it is?
I mean, Kyle McCoy is technically a sophomore right now, and he has a 1.93 ERA.
I mean, I could give an explanation for it. My guess is you have a very good freshman year, and you come back and you think you've done all the work you have to do, and you're just going to keep improving. I will say, more likely than not, I feel that people make jumps in their second year, but that's definitely not always the case. Players sometimes level out after what they do their freshman year. It's hard to say, I think, unless you're analyzing a specific player. Do you think that, Sam, I assume you wouldn't say that the majority of players get worse their sophomore years.
No, I don't think it's a majority thing. I do think that with guys who are freshmen that have really good years, I think part of it is expectations, right? That the expectations that are then placed on them are like assuming they're going to take a massive leap. But as we've talked about before on this podcast, progression isn't always linear. And I think it's kind of can be a mix of things. I think teams might figure them out. They just don't take that leap. They weren't necessarily, ready for it. They just never were kind of this freshman season. They overperformed in a maybe small sample size. I think that it's definitely a thing. I think McManus is kind of an example of that per se. I mean, he obviously pitched well last season, but you look at his ERA, it's not like this kid was throwing 3, blank innings every week. It was still above 4. And he was just one of their better pitchers on a terrible staff. So I think the expectations that were levied around him is, he's going to take a huge leap. Deshaun Harris-Smith, I think, was kind of the opposite, as if like, he had a bad freshman season, but hey, this was a highly touted guy. He's going to take a next step, whatever that may be. And obviously that just hasn't happened this year. He's clearly kind of seeming like a guy who's probably exiting College Park just because of struggles. So I think it's kind of a mix of a multitude of things. But I do think that the freshman to sophomore year is one of the biggest variances in terms of how players kind of grow or stay level or sometimes even decline.
The McManus decline is very weird because it's not like his expectations drastically changed from last season to this season. Like, he was a consistent weekend starter after the second weekend last year. He's in the same role. They bumped him up one day from Sunday to Saturday. Past weekend, he started on Sunday, and the performances have just not been there so far. Just looking at the stats so far, against Ball State, 3 runs. They were unearned, but that's 3 runs. Next weekend against Western Carolina, 5 earned runs, 6 runs scored total on him in 2 innings. Had a 2-inning performance against Wake Forest after he got hurt doing his warm-ups. And then this past week against UCLA, 8 runs in that second inning, 7 earned. It's weird. The expectations have not changed that much for him. He's not like the Friday guy. So I don't know why the performance would have dropped this much.
It's interesting stuff, and it's really fascinating. We'll quickly hit on the rest here because we know you kept you along for a while. Softball went 3-1. They went 1-1 against Georgia Southern, 2-0 against Rider, who was terrible, and also called the Bronx instead of the Broncos, just trying to be different. It was an interesting weekend for them. And then wrestling, Brendan, at the Big Ten Championships. Obviously, a team record they set in terms of team points, and also 6 finishers or placers who will be at the NCAA. So a strong weekend, but their top guys didn't play as well as I think maybe Maryland expected them to. Ethan Miller was the number 1 seed, and he fell before he could even make the semis. So take us through what happened there with Alex Clemson's team.
Yeah, I mean, I think overall a very successful weekend, as you say, with the record set. I know that Ethan Miller has to be a little bit disappointed. Obviously, you said he came in as the number 1 seed. He finished 6th. Maryland had all of 6 guys finished between 5th and 7th. So that's kind of definitely an improvement for Maryland. I know that they would have loved to have someone finish in that top 3, but Ethan Miller, who was ranked as, depending on where you look, one of the top 3 wrestlers in the country, top 4 or 5 wrestlers in the country, he's got to be hungry going into the NCAA championships. And I think for Maryland as a program, having someone to make the podium in the NCAA tournament would be a much bigger deal than the Big Ten. So a lot of those guys are ready to go. I will say Branson John had a particularly outstanding performance. He was preceded 12th, and then he ended up finishing 6th. So all around, for the entire program of wrestling, a successful weekend. But some individual guys likely have more to desire going into NCAA. I will make this one very quick point. I know you touched on softball, Sam. I'll go back to it very quickly. Where do you guys think that Maryland ranks in RPI in softball right now out of the 309 teams in the country?
280.
240.
They're 87th. The team they play this weekend, Rutgers, is 159th.
Damn, we were just hating there. Sorry.
So I feel like I'm not in the room where the RPI is calculated, but it's definitely slightly better than I would have thought. I guess it's always hard to know because of who they played, and I think some of it likely has to do with the fact that they played the number 1 team in the country at the time, Texas. So maybe that has something to do with it, and maybe it's a kind of a Kevin Rowland example where they have some wins, but mostly against weaker opponents. But I think getting off to a good start in Big Ten play against Rutgers will definitely be the goal team that ranks way lower than them in RPI. That's all I have on wrestling and softball.
And that's pretty much all we have for you. Brendan's got one more segment. We know we've kept you for a while, so hear him out on Terrific Terp, though.
Yes, please. Let's take it back to the fall sports to crown this Terrific Terp, or should I say the summer, because this week's Terrific Terp is Katie Kaufman Beach. The Maryland field hockey legend grew up in Pennsylvania, but in 1992, she came to College Park. She helped lead Maryland to the 1993 NCAA title and was an All-American in 1994 and 1996. That same year, she was selected to the U.S. national team in 1996 for the Atlanta Olympic Games. She was actually on the national team from 1994 to 2004, which obviously included some of her time at Maryland. This is pretty common in the world of American field hockey for the U.S. national team, as was the case for some Terps who played in the Paris Olympic Games this past summer. After Beach left Maryland, she continued her professional playing career internationally while building up her coaching resume. She started as an assistant coach at UVA and then extremely quickly returned back to Maryland to be an assistant coach under Missy Mahar. During that time, in the year 2000, she was named the U.S. Field Hockey Athlete of the Year. A few years after that, she retired from her playing career, which was in 2004, and then became the head coach at Columbia, where she was the head coach for 4 years. She then moved to the Chicago area and launched Windy City Field Hockey with her husband. It had been a couple weeks since I brought back that type of story, so I thought you might enjoy. That program, Windy City Field Hockey, is a youth training field hockey program that is a partnership with USA Field Hockey. Beach is a 2014 inductee of the United States Field Hockey Hall of Fame, as well as this week's terrific Terp.
Not going to keep you long. Brennan was good. You can find us at Under the Shell on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, wherever you get your podcasts and social media. Have a good rest of your night and enjoy some March Madness.
Guess what? You've got Under the Shell podcast. Nobody does it better.